Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Next Level Freelancing Advice Show. I'm Robert McGuire, and I run Nation 1099, a resource for experienced freelancers and consultants who are looking for advanced career and business guidance. Our goal for this show is for you to have real practical steps at the end of every episode that you can use right away to improve your business, because we believe more is possible. This show focuses on real-life problems that freelancers are having. I've collected a few examples in advance, and our guests will give advice on those specific cases. That will take about a half hour, and then we'll turn to your questions. Our theme today is getting smarter about pricing as a freelancer or consultant. It's not just about setting an hourly rate. It's about developing a real pricing strategy. And our guest today is Jayne Heggen. Welcome, Jayne.
Hello there. Nice to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Let me tell you a little bit about Jayne. She's been a business operations consultant for 18 years. She helps businesses understand how their processes can help them grow or cause them to stagnate if they're not paying attention to their processes. Jayne has worked with large global companies such as Microsoft, eBay, and United Airlines, as well as with small companies and with solopreneurs like us. Now, before we start, a little bit about what you're seeing on the screen. If you have a comment, please share it in that chat thread on the right. But that's hard for us to monitor that thread for questions. So if there's something on this subject you'd like Jayne to address or to respond to, use that link at the bottom where it says ask a question. And right next to that, you'll see another link that says polls. You can answer those anytime you like, and we'll look at the results a little bit later in our discussion. The top navigation bar has links to more information about Jayne and about Nation 1099. You can also share this episode with your colleagues, and you can follow this channel to be notified about upcoming episodes. Lastly, the show will be available for replay afterward at the Nation 1099 blog. Okay, Jayne, let's get started. I wonder if we can start by just having you contrast two different approaches to pricing with all other factors being the same in a hypothetical scenario. How might two freelancers who have the same services and the same skills and the same experience arrive at different pricing strategies that are both effective?
That's a very good question. And I think we need to step back for just a moment and look at the way people are actually modeling their business. And the reason I'm saying that is pricing strategies get to a level of expertise and knowledge that gives you the information to put together strategies. And at the same time, we also have a lot of people starting out in business who are actually not pricing, but really more costing. They're estimating. The reality is most of us as solopreneurs are estimating. We're doing it either informally, by looking at marketplace or listening to friends or listening to what's in our hearts and minds as to what we should be charging, or we actually are setting up estimating formulas to look at what our costs are. So that is what most of us are doing.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jayne. Your audio is working fine, but you're just talking a little bit quiet. And so some of our participants are noticing that. So I'll just ask you to speak up a little bit.
I will. Thank you.
Sure. So that's really interesting that, I think it's fair to say that, you can have two different ways of pricing your services, like two different freelancers can arrive at perfectly legitimate ways of pricing their services. It's just sort of based on different considerations about what the market they've decided to target, right?
Absolutely. You have to be in the mindset you could be competitive in that you're a very known service or known product. For example, you specialize in SEO. A lot of people specialize in SEO. So you have a commodity framework where your pricing is going to be somewhat locked by the marketplace. Or you're going to be a little more creative. Maybe you're doing something that's out of the box different. You have a new app you're putting out there. And that is a whole different approach to how you're going to price your costs and create your estimates for your clients and how they use your services. So you got two different things going there.
Yeah. And so when you say commodity framework, what's an example of that?
A commodity framework is, me too. There's a lot of people doing the same thing you're doing. They're familiar with the products you have, and it doesn't mean that your products are undervalued. It's a big marketplace. It's a big pie. But people know essentially what you provide to them and are more apt to ask what's your rate right up front because they're familiar with SEO or they're familiar with web developers. So the question is, can you provide something of greater value to the clients that gets you up and out of commodity. Commodity, there's nothing wrong with commodity pricing. You got to pump a lot of volume.
Right.
And if that's the case, then you're going to do fine. If you can't pump a lot of volume, then you've got to start raising up out of commodity pricing.
Yeah, the example I think of is, I don't know if this is true, but what I hear, the sort of urban legend, for example, is that gas station, convenience stores, they make almost nothing on the gas that they sell out at the pumps. That it's a commodity, basically priced for zero profit for the retailer there, because they're making profit on the milk and cookies and everything else when you walk in the store.
Actually, they make it on the soft drinks, the
Yeah.
fountain. You have over 200% markup. You're right. Gas is a commodity. Oil is not. The car wash is not. But yeah, gas brings you in, and then everything else is sold at an upcharge.
Yeah, so it can make sense. What about with services? Like, can you imagine? Because a lot of what we're doing is professional services. When we're talking about freelancers, does commodity work ever make sense in that situation? Commodity pricing, I should say.
Actually, no, but we fall into it because we don't have any other way to set our pricing in general. So I think it's not a bad thing to look and see what other people are doing. You need to understand exactly what the services they are offering. You can compare and contrast, and then you can decide, hey, I have more of this, then I can charge this much more, or wow, I need to get more of this to be competitive in the marketplace. But it really is, you have to evaluate that service that you're providing your client. An example would be some work I've done with a little boutique on the West Coast, and they were trying to discover how to do a better job at pricing their phases of assessment. They were a strategy company, and they were pricing their services at a pretty much a flat rate. When the reality is, the most of the work that is done is in the discovery side portion of any kind of assessment for any consultant, where you're finding out what's going on, what the problem is, how am I going to apply my services to you. And they were undercharging that and trying to recoup their funds as you're going through the implementation of whatever that solution was. The reality is it has to be charged up front because a lot of clients stop right after discovery. So it's that kind of shift you have to be aware of. But breaking your product down, if you have a services, into like 3 or 4 components that you can sell independently or mix and match, then you start protecting then your rate and your costs a little better.
Well, I'm tempted. I mean, we've got these cases we're going to go through. Let me pause and say, I see the comments there from people who are watching live, and I apologize. There's not control on our end about the volume that I can adjust. I think it's just a matter of the mic and how close you are to it, Jayne.
All right, let's pull it up a little closer and see what happens.
Yeah, that's definitely louder. I'm sorry if that's uncomfortable for you.
It's no problem. It's no problem. It sounded good earlier, but hey, if you guys can't hear me, then this isn't a whole lot of good, is it?
Yeah, it's perfectly clear. It's just a low volume.
All right.
But this is good. This is better. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate all the feedback.
All right. Well, so I've got these cases, and I need to get through them. But as you're talking, I'm fascinated. I want to ask a bunch of follow-up questions, like, oh, what about this example? Let's dive into the cases, though. Yeah. And as I do, I'll just remind people about the poll questions there at the bottom that will look at people's responses a little bit later. All right. So the first case. Every prospective client I've ever had has asked me my rates in the first phone conversation. It feels like I never get a chance to sell them. How do I get control of the conversation so I can focus on what they need and how I can help them before they get focused on costs?
Well, a couple of things are happening here. So let's go behind the scenes just a teeny bit before we even get to the discussions of rate and cost. How did you set up this call? If this call was set up, let's say you went into LinkedIn and say, hey, I've got these services. Do you need them? You're going to get a no or what is your rate almost immediately. So if you haven't engaged well with a potential client and haven't expressed to them what you bring to the party, the value you bring to them, their first response is going to be, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I get these calls all the time. What's your rate? Essentially just said, goodbye, don't bug me, is exactly what just happened. So you can't expect a client to be receptive to you when you're going after them in a sales mentality. I'm going to sell you something you need because I see there's a need for you, when they don't see it for themselves. So, and your needs probably dead on. It's probably right. It probably helped them. But if you don't have an engagement with that client up front, you will never get to the discussion you need to. And then pricing, cost, rates is just a validator.
And what about, so the example you just gave is if I'm going out and pitching someone, a prospect that I identified and I reached out to them. What about, because a lot of freelancers are pretty good at inbound marketing, that we get clients coming to us through our, so what if a client, a prospective client, I should say, reaches out to me and asks for a call, asks to learn more about my services. And then it goes like we just described there, like the first thing I want to ask about is the rates.
Well, that is where the client's coming to you. He's already qualified himself. He's interested. So if they come with the first question is rates, I think you can accept that as a question. Fabulous. We will talk about rates. You called me. You obviously see a need or you see a value in my services. Let's talk about those and see which ones are correct for you. In doing that, you start qualifying now and in your own mind what you would be putting together for this client. So you've got your brain going now on what those costs are, what I could pull together for that client to help him.
Okay, terrific. All right, let me get to the next case. I would like to raise prices for my freelance services, but I keep running into the problem of what the market will bear. Oh, this was the headline on our email I sent out, what the market will bear, or the going rate is not good enough. All the research and all the gossip with my peers tells me that clients won't pay more than the going rate, but I know that some freelancers must be earning more somehow. How do I escape the market rate?
Well, market rate, let's talk about that for just a moment. Let's go behind the scenes on that. That's an average. So that is not a dictate. That's not a demand. That's not a guideline. It's an average across a lot of different services and different individuals that get bucketed into the category of your services. So that's the first thing. So if you're going for market rate, then you really aren't going after the value you provide. And I'm not talking value pricing. I'm just talking about the value of your services for a client. Again, you need to actually go and ask your clients. Or if you don't have a client to ask, I would do a survey to people who may be your clients. Ask them what is relevant to them and what you can expect from a pricing perspective. Don't sell to them if you do that because you're doing a survey. But don't rely on the market. Don't rely on your friends. Don't rely on gossip. Don't rely on these other things, because the people who are charging a higher rate aren't relying on them either.
So you mean that people with that our own perception about what the market rate is might be way off?
I think it's way off. Yes.
So clients will often push back by pointing to say, oh, I can find. Let's take copywriting. Probably a third of freelancers are working copywriting, right. And so they'll point to examples. I can get this white paper for a third of what you're proposing to me. So are you saying that maybe they're hustling us and they're not correct when they say that?
Well, clients in general are going to go for low cost, and we actually fall into low cost providers as well. So, and we've actually trained clients to take that, approach with us because we're freelancers. Come on. So they know they can play with that a bit. I think you've got to set your boundary. Hey, if that really low level project, you really need the funds, you're going to go jump past the dime, so to speak, and go for the penny because you need to. I get it. I've done it myself. We all have done that. But you have to understand you either need to let those go at some point in time, realizing you did jump over the dime to go for the penny, and next time try not to do that, because you keep doing that, then you're going to price yourself, out of your business for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, well, so it sounds like you're saying there's sort of like a mental adjustment that needs to be made. Yes. Work up your courage and try and have more patience. But are there practical steps to making that adjustment from, okay, I've entered this, I've been working for 3 or 5 years as a freelancer, and I'm sort of in that bottom quadrant of the pricing. Are there practical steps people can take to start transitioning to getting more profit out of the work they're doing?
Absolutely, because what we are basically talking about is negotiating all of a sudden. So we're negotiating on pricing
Oh,
for our
okay.
services. But there are steps you need to do. You need to be knowledgeable of your costs. You need to understand what it takes to complete your services. You want to maybe have a high, medium, and low. You have complex, projects. You have things that are kind of in the middle, and then you probably have a lot of small projects. You need to know what your threshold is to accept a project coming in. So, even your calculator, for instance, is a great way to start to understand what are my costs associated with doing this project. Now, this doesn't get to every cost, but it does get to your features, your effort, what you're going to the vendors that you're going to use, all of the things that actually are going to deliver that product. That's not your ultimate cost because you haven't gotten into the value part of it, where with experience and time and energy, you can actually raise your prices even more.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and get into the value part of it because I
Sure.
think this is a concept that is referred to a lot. I have a vague understanding of it from reading. You and I were discussing this book recently, and now I'm forgetting the name of it. Alan Weiss.
Right. Yes.
That's where I learned this concept of value-based pricing myself. And so I'm not sure everybody is familiar with that. So let's just give a quick orientation, the nickel tour, what value-based pricing is, and then we can get into how to maybe start moving in that direction.
Absolutely. There's a fundamental shift when you go into value-based pricing because there's multiple strategies in value-based pricing, as there are multiple strategies in estimating or cost pricing, so to speak. Um, what we do now is we look at our product first or our service. We look at our cost. We determine then our price that we want to give. We look at the value we associate with our services and our price. And then we go to look for customers who will buy our stuff, where we are selling stuff in. When you get to value pricing, you actually flip the paradigm. You go to the customers first and you find out what do they really need, what do they want, because they're not going to buy if they don't need it and don't want it. From there, then you start backing up, what is the customer's value? uh, let's say in this instance, um, you have a track record of providing extraordinary results for clients. You have case studies. You have things of that nature that prove, what you can do when you're working with a client such as this person you're talking to. Their value quotient starts going up. They start applying the value to you, assigning it to you. Then you get into price and they go, hey, it's higher, it's lower. Then you can look at your cost, where's your threshold, and then you look at your product. I may take something off the table because your budget is so low, even at my lowest threshold, I can't afford that. But I tell you what, I'll do your project. I will take off these 5 items and we can do it for this. So when you get down to that lowest threshold, you have to pull things off the table. You can't just give your product and your cost out there and people say, oh no, I can't even do that, but I still want to do the same product. No, do not do that. I mean, that's the hardest thing on earth to do because you never recover from that because you're operating at a total loss.
When it comes to value-based pricing, one way I understand it is to really try and understand a dollar figure of. Pardon me, I've got someone. The mailman's ringing the doorbell at my house here.
Oh,
Could you hear that? Is everybody?
surprise.
I'm not sure what's getting picked up on the mic. So one way, my own understanding of value-based pricing is during the pre-consult phase and hopefully before the negotiation, you're trying to get the prospective client to identify an actual dollar value to them, like if the project succeeds, like okay, if what you want to happen does happen, what will that mean for you and your company? And hopefully they'll say, well, if we get 100 leads and our conversion rate is 25% and 25 new customers to us is $250,000 of business, then you've just heard them say that this project is worth $250,000 to them.
Right.
Am I characterizing value-based pricing in a way that makes sense to you?
Well, it is a strategy. There is a strategy out there that's kind of a risk strategy where you work with your client. Hey, if I deliver what I say I'm going to deliver, then you will pay me a bonus amount equivalent to $100,000. In the meantime, I'll come in at this other rate so we can get the project going and started. So
Okay.
it is a strategy. There's something like 40 or 50 different pricing strategies when you get it's pretty complex stuff, but this is pretty common. Sometimes it's called a performance bonus, an incentive bonus, a lot of things to either get things done on time or to reach some kind of conversion or transactional measurement. But you have a hard concrete measurement.
Okay. So this next case, I'm going to abbreviate this one. It's essentially saying, how do you get people to share with you the value of the project? How do you get them to answer questions so that you know what the value is to them?
Essentially, this is you need to engage with your clients. If you are going beyond just a basic, uh, I guess, a first conversation, going into a second conversation, you are going into a basically a discovery session with your client. You're now finding out, okay, why are they looking at your services? What problem issue would your services solve for them? You really need to get into that problem solution area. In my case, what I do often is I do what's called a project charter up front, where I talk to them and actually have them tell me what their problem is. I come back with an if then scenario to start gauging how important that value really is, because sometimes these are false values. The it's not really the issue, but it's something very painful. But if I can get further in and find out what that real issue is, then I can validate that with the client and I can come back and say, then here's how we get to it. Here's the outcomes we're going to reach. Here's the deliverables you're going to have, and here's the price. And I have never had a client back down from that. I may negotiate a little bit, but I've never had a client back down. So it's really that discovery up front is critical.
Yeah, the discovery. Yeah, that's key. I guess I call it the pre-consult, but that's a good way of, or a good reminder, the
Yeah,
discovery phase.
yeah.
And I one reason I had to do this myself recently, I was talking to a prospective client, and it just sort of reminded me that he is not necessarily the decision maker. He's the person I'm having the conversation with. So essentially what you're doing during this discovery or pre-consult
Right.
stage, and then producing that document you described, what was the name of it again?
It's project charter.
Your project charter.
Hmm.
What you're doing is arming that person for good conversations with their peers and their bosses
Yes.
about committing to this expense.
Absolutely. So, because in discovery, you're going to do all of these things. Who else needs to be involved in this decision? Are you the ultimate decision maker? What else needs to happen here? And you actually resolve all of that before you go into detailing out what you're going to do, because you need to do that as a consultant. Even if you're not a consultant, you need to detail this out and then come in with the appropriate price for this project. And then is it high, medium, and low? That then gets into a negotiation.
Yeah. Well, I wish I'd like to try and come up with a concrete example. So let's say a freelance software engineer or freelance. I'm talking to freelance podcast producers right now. Let's take a freelance software engineer. And so what they're selling is services that maybe are by the hour, or maybe it's more deliverables based. So what are some different strategy considerations that two different freelance software engineers should go through when they're figuring out how they're going to price their services?
Well, you can take two paths. One would be to have a conversation, and you can tell your client, "Yep, I got it. I understand exactly what you're talking about. This is something that's right in my sweet spot. Let me get back to you with an estimate or something so that we can sign this deal and move forward." Uh, at that point in time, you really have not clarified what the project is. You've clarified that you have a service, and you have clarified that indeed they may have a need for your service, but that's all you've done. So now everything's going to be handled in the pricing negotiation, which should be the very last thing. Uh, if you are really going to try to close this client, then the first thing you do is talk about what is the outcome, what is the deliverable, what is the expectation, what is the timing, what is the budget, who else is signing off. You have to go through these steps. This does not have to be a 10-hour conversation. This is, 4 or 5 really succinct questions that let the clients know you know your stuff, because you wouldn't be asking this stuff if you did not know your service and your pricing structure, and they'll have a better feel for you and have a better respect for the recommendations you present to them. You will still negotiate. You will always negotiate, but you will be negotiating from knowledge and understanding versus a feeling. And there's nothing wrong with feelings, but feelings don't get you to the concrete thing that's called cash, which we all need to have a flow of.
Well, I hate to use myself as an example too much, but if I'm going to indulge just for a minute, this
Sure.
one time. Let me walk you through sort of an example that I've gone through in my business. And I'm a marketing consultant, those folks who are not aware, and in addition to running Nation 1099. And so my business model has essentially been low volume, very big budget. So I have
Right.
maybe a minimum number of clients, but I ask for this very significant commitment over several months. So it's a big lift. And so my sales cycles are very long.
Right.
Um, and the other option is, and then what I do is I kind of include a lot of strategy work, just sort of undocumented and for free. I mean, they're focused on the deliverables, but before I can do it, I really have to outline a strategy.
Right.
And I just kind of build that in, and pay myself along the way. But it's occurred to me that maybe another option is to sell a kind of strategy plan for much less than the minimum, for just kind of, the few hours that the strategy plan costs, sell it up front, on the idea that maybe I'll have higher volume of clients, because because I would get a bunch of them to buy at this lower price, more of them see it, more of them sign on, but then I'm not getting that commitment from those initial clients. So I've got sort of the two possible options there. What's your response to that?
Well, I do pretty much the same thing as you do. It's larger clients over long durations. I typically go to the lower sell-in because there is a group of clients that will go to just discovery and that's it. Um, and those are quick. Those I can turn those around quickly, and this a nice chunk of change. Those that only buy that come back most times 6 months later, maybe a year later, with a big project. Coming out of that lower cost strategy discovery session, you've framed out and made it very easy now for a client to come in with the bigger budget because they know now exactly what they're spending it on. They know how long it's going to take. And then importantly, I actually do not give away anything unknown. I will give things, but in my negotiation, when I state with people and show with them, is what I'm doing. If I'm giving them something, I actually put a change of scope in so they know that I've given it to them. Because if I don't, then I'll lose the value of that to
Yeah,
them. And
that makes sense.
yeah, they'll forget all about that I spent 3 weeks, you know, talking to 400 people to get this information for you. They just got the information and they're happy to have it.
Yeah.
And I gave that to them in hopes that we would actually do more work later because I've given them that gift. But you have to remind them of that gift.
Yeah, I like that. I'm learning some vocabulary. So the option B that I just described, you characterize that as the lower cost sell-in.
Yes.
And that's new vocabulary for me. Great. Along with the discovery phase
Right.
that I was forgetting. All right. Excellent. I'm going to read our last case here in a second. Let me remind people that we have the poll questions there at the bottom, and I'm going to turn to those in a minute. So if you haven't filled it out, feel free. And if there's something on this topic about setting rates, setting prices, pricing strategy, thinking smarter about your freelance rates, then use that ask a question button down there, and we'll get to it in a minute with Jayne. So I'm so frustrated with the rates being offered for my work being flat or even declining. Some of this is because the publishing industry where I work has been decimated in the last 20 years, and some of it is due to more competition from overseas where people are able to work for less. It feels like I'm caught in a downward spiral. Going back to a full-time job in the same field isn't really an option because the changes in the industry have wiped out most of these jobs. It seems like the only way out is to change into a different career entirely, but I love what I do, and I know it's valuable and high quality. I'm not sure how to get control of my earnings again.
Well, I think that's beyond pricing, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You're basically talking about evaluating what do you want. And this is more of a career move versus a pricing move. Um, that said, you still have to price your products and you still have to have an income coming in, and it is more and more competitive. Uh, there is, especially with your overseas, et cetera, and so forth, in what you're pricing, and I don't know how you're pricing, so that would be an interesting thing for me to learn more about how you're coming to your price. Uh, I cannot believe that it's not to your benefit or not of value that you are locally based, that you are receptive, that you know the category, that you know the product, that you don't have to worry about training me or watching what I do, because this question sounds like a very experienced person. These are all value statements that can be woven into your pricing because you have experience, you have knowledge, and it sounds like either the clients are underestimating your experience and knowledge, or you're not putting it out there. So that would be just a very high level suggestion to consider. Again, not knowing the specifics around the specific person.
All right, thank you. Let's look at the polls real quick, and I see we have a question too. So the first poll question: do you have a standardized rate card? We have 9 people responding yes and no. I would have answered no. I guess it kind of depends on what we mean by rate card. So tell us a bit about why you asked that question, Jayne, and what you would advise.
I advise everybody to have a rate card and a standardized rate card, because that is your base costs. You have to have those down and covered no matter what you do. A standardized rate card doesn't mean one price. It means you have possibly 3 or 4 prices depending on the services or combination of services you offer. It is your starting point as you start thinking about what you'll be charging a client. So to have one, have it standardized is great, makes it easier. Importantly, you can track. And as you track against your standardized rate card and your project, you will see where their clients are asking you to do something different. Now you can start tracking that. Is that something I charge more for? Is it an additional service going forward? Is it just a one-off? You need to be able to track how well your projects run and work against a standardized rate card. And you can change your rate card, absolutely, but you've got to have something to track against.
And is this something that's necessarily public?
I would never publicize a rate card.
Okay. I think that maybe that's where I was getting confused, because I think rate card, I think of what in the publishing industry they show to advertisers for the, and it's usually public. Like, you can click on the website and see how much the ad rates cost.
Right.
So you're talking about a rate card that is held close to the vest almost always.
Yeah, that is your negotiating place. That's your knowledge. A bad habit a lot of people are in, and this is a very difficult thing, is this thing called cost plus, which is the hours it takes to get something done, a cost assigned to that hour, and it could be a salary, it could be a quote from a vendor, and then actually plussing that up. So if you have if you're negotiating at a cost plus level, your client's seeing your hours, they're going to question your hours, and they don't understand the effort that's going in. So it's a very difficult place to be. So no, I never show my rate card to my clients.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and you referred earlier to the calculator on Nation 1099. Yeah. For folks who haven't seen it, it's essentially a way of figuring out what I call the minimum rate, and right. What we advise on there very strongly is, this is just for your internal information only, right? And what I didn't say on there, I'm going to add it next time I update this post, is what you're saying here, which is to set, have these benchmarks and then start evaluating your progress against them.
Well, absolutely, because at least if you're starting out, it's going to be a little hard to capture maybe all of your retirement income and some other things, but you want to be able to recoup, your benefits costs and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So you have to start out. You may not be able to get all of it at once, but you have to start from a solid foundation and build towards it. And you don't know if you're there or not if you're not tracking it.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. And that calculator, I will put here, I'll put a link to it here in the chat window shortly after we finish this up. So if folks hang around for 30 or 60 seconds after we finish, I'll include the link to that. And you can find it on Nation 1099. Let's look at the second poll question. Again, it looks like we have 6, 7, 8, 9 responses. What's the most important document to share with your clients? 1, creative brief. 2 proposals. 2 people said proposal. 0 people said contract, services agreement, estimate, or invoice, and 6 people said scope of work. So, what would you advise, and what do you make of those responses?
These are good responses, and these are indeed important documents. The most important document on that list is your invoice. Here's why. Because that's when the client thinks about what the work was that was just completed, looks at the price of that invoice, and was that a good experience or a bad experience? Wow, this is way more than I ever thought I was going to have to pay for this level of work. Or wow, this is a deal. I got a great piece of work, and this guy's pretty cheap. And these guys you can raise your rates on, so this is a good thing. But it's an indicator of client satisfaction, believe it or not. So when you put your invoices out, you know you're going to have a response. Now, they may not articulate the response to you. If you're smart, you'll go in and periodically check with your client on the responses. How do they feel you're doing? How's the work going? Those things are incredibly important.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's just amazing. I mean, so the invoice is a strategic tool, but it's amazing. It's a basic operational tool. And it's amazing how often freelancers just neglect sending them out on time. And I hire subcontractors, and I do my best to look out for them and to support them. And it's amazing how often my own subcontractors don't send me the invoice. And so I'm like, and so I'm reminding them frequently, I'll gladly pay you when you send me the invoice.
Well, here's another thought. If you don't send your invoice on a timely basis, do you really care about the work you just did?
Yeah.
Because if you can't send a timely invoice, the client's not going to pay attention to paying you on a timely basis, because obviously for some reason this is not as important.
Yeah.
Get your invoice out, be on top of it. It basically shows how professional you are.
Right. So we have one question here from Susie, and Susie says, she thanks us and says, how do you address a time gap in career, left the industry to raise a family with rates? How do you address a time gap in career with rates after she left industry to raise a family? She's been out of the job market for 9 years and getting back in.
Well, in this instance, you are coming back in. So in a way, you are starting over. I'm not saying your rates should come in at entry level, but if you're coming back into the business, and you have to relearn something, you're going to want to be more at entry level until you get your learnings up to speed. Then your experience, your background, everything pays off, and you can raise your rates. So, and this is going to be the people you're going to work for or bring you in as well. And they may know that you've been out of the cycle for a while, and they're kind of giving you the favor, or working with you to get you up to speed. So you have to take that into consideration. While you're doing all this, start planning what you want your rate to be. What other knowledge do I need to gather so I can actually charge this rate? You can be exploring and seeing, what your clients like or don't like. You can be gaining a lot of information here, but you are starting, over again. You don't have to do this for an extended period of time as when you first started in the working world, but you're probably going to have to dedicate a good 6 months to get back up to speed so you can charge the rate that you deserve.
Yeah. It seems like value-based pricing is a part of the answer here too. Like if you ask yourself, what is the value to the clients and can I provide the value? And it's not the same as, will I work really hard? Because obviously you will, right? But do I have the experience and skills to provide the value that they want? And if there's some slippage there, then that maybe tells you the rate needs to be lower. But if there is no slippage, then you can charge it.
Yep, absolutely. So, and you don't set aside your experience. All you're doing really is fine tuning, it up so you can actually take that experience out to the next level. But you have a skills gap, so you can close that fairly quickly.
Okay. So the next question we have is from Patty. Patty says, I'm a freelance B2B writer with 20 years of corporate experience. And I have a strong opinion about this one myself. But just a year of freelancing. I've been approached by 2 different contacts this week to rewrite a website. I've never done that specific writing before. Should my lack of experience be reflected in my project pricing, or do I fake it till I make it? Neither of the contacts have asked me for samples because they trust my other B2B abilities.
So now you're going to be converting your knowledge. It doesn't mean you don't have the knowledge, you just haven't used it in this way. So, definitely go out there and check out other people who are writing, website content, because there is a variance. It's not as dramatic as B2C. So B2B puts you in a good place. I would say go in with confidence. Should you be in a place where you're going to be asked to, let's say, for a performance, like a conversion rate metric you're going to have to hit, you've got to be honest with yourself. Say, gosh, I'm learning this. Can I hit that metric? You may have a conversation with your client then. They appreciate honesty. They're not asking you for samples, so something's ringing really true with them about you. But I wouldn't, fake it till you make it. I would say convert everything I know, knowing there's going to be some things I don't know. But I have to tell you, every project, even today, when I walk into a client, and I've been doing this a long time, I know I'm going to have to convert everything I've ever known and learned for this client's project to get it done, because their environment's unique and it's different, the language, the people, the culture. So the same kind of thing. So if you feel you can't convert your knowledge into this environment, have the conversation. My guess is you can convert the knowledge. So that's not faking it till you make it.
Yeah, don't say that out loud. Don't say it to the client.
Yeah, never
I mean,
say that to the client. Yeah, no,
don't
no.
understand. We freelancers undersell themselves too quickly. That
Yeah,
it
do not
seems to me
undersell.
they sell themselves short. It seems like this one is an example where if you default to hourly pricing, you're going to make a mistake, and if you instead make it
Great
deliverables
point.
based pricing, like I would make this deliverables based, and
Yes,
knowing that it's going to take me more hours and my actual hourly um, uh, profit on this will be lower. But I'm going to take on that responsibility myself because I'm in a learning phase and make sure that the client actually gets the deliverables they're asking for.
perfect. You're absolutely right. I wish I'd said that. But it is, yeah. Go to a project rate in this instance, because you're going to spend time learning something. Client doesn't need to know you stayed up all night long revising and editing something to get it in place to present to them, and they're delighted with it. That's great. They don't need to know that as a skill you learned, and that's great. But you keep that to yourself.
Yeah. So just to spell out the example, let's say hypothetically an expert would do this in 10 hours and it's going to take you 50 hours because you're learning. Don't tell the client, here's my hourly rate and it's going to take 50 hours.
Yes.
Just charge them 10 hours times your rate, or in other words, put it in a project rate, and then you're going to take a haircut. You're going to make less because it's actually taking you 50 hours, but you're learning, you're gaining new clients. You got to make a decision if that's advisable for you in this case.
Right.
But if you do want the job and it's advisable for you, then that's the approach, is make it a deliverable or project-based price.
Right. Yeah, you have to decide, is this a project worth investing in, because this is going to get me closer to a skill set I'm desiring, because that's going to line me up with another group of clients. You might want to make that investment. Sometimes I call those portfolio clients. I
Yeah.
know I'm not going to make any money on them, but I'm going to walk away with a skill set where I can actually close more clients, or more diverse clients.
All right. Well, Jayne, this has been terrific. Tell us more about where people can learn about your work and what you're working on next.
Well, working on a lot of things. At this point in time, I am working on a product called Business Brain Bites, and it's taking the 18 years or so. And 18 is a good number because 8 plus 1 is 9, and 9 is supposed to be for prosperity. I'm going to take it. I'm going to run with it. uh, Taking down the information that I've learned about business processes, how things work, and bringing it down into bite-sized chunks of information that you as entrepreneurs need. And you don't need a big, horse and pony show, but I need to have something that's going to tell me, how to write a project scope. Great, we're going to have those things. So they're building. Right now, we just opened up a group on Facebook. And for any of you who would like to go in depth on any of the questions for what we've discussed today, I'm happy to spend some time with you. You can schedule like 30 minutes for free to finish off and go into detail how maybe one of these questions applies to you. I'm happy to do that. I'll give you my information. General business tips are on my website. I am going to be releasing what I call progressive pricing guide in about 2 or 3 weeks. And if you want to sign up there or let me know if you're interested, I'm happy to send that to you for free for being part of this session.
All right, cool. Thank you very much. And so Jayne's going to drop some links in the chat window, and I will too. It might be 30 seconds or so after we finish up because our hands are full. Jayne, thank you very much for holding the mic. I'm sorry about the tech troubles.
No worries, no worries. I am sorry about it too, but I've had a delightful time, and thanks to the audience for being so patient. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
If you'd like to submit your case for one of our future episodes, please send it in. We're looking for real-life challenges to running your solo business. We're going to be off next week, but on August 9, we'll be talking with a branding consultant about building your brand as a freelancer. Some other upcoming episodes will be about shifting from more clients to better clients, negotiating skills, writing better contracts, and retirement planning, other financial issues for freelancers. And I just put on the schedule, if you look at our schedule of upcoming episodes, we're going to have this very special joint live appearance with the FreeCon 18 in August 18, in September in Austin. And they'll have sort of a live audience there on one end and as we do this live show. Remember, when it comes to your freelance career, more is possible. We just need to find the steps to the next level. Jayne, thank you very much for being on the show.
My pleasure. It was fun.
Goodbye, everyone. See you next week or 2 weeks from now.
Bye-bye.